Okay, I think I'm actually live this time. Welcome. I apologize for my delay in getting here. One thing after another. I was thought I was live for 10 minutes and was talking and realized that I had to push the button to start. And then I pushed it and I didn't confirm it and I ran anyway. The learning curve is steep, folks. And I was having a little bit of a hard time getting my camera working. I did so many things when I originally did the setup to get the camera to work that I wasn't sure which things were the critical elements. I had to take my camera off to take pictures of my son's 6th grade graduation last week, and couldn't remember which of the things were must-dos in order to make it work, but I think I've got it working now. And now I know what are the absolute things that need to happen for it to work, but I'm figuring this all out, folks. So I set this stream up last night after a really long day of yard work. I'm very sore. And my yard is looking better, but that also meant I have chronic pain and autoimmune issues. So a lot of yard work meant for a lot more pain last night, and our air conditioning is out. So it was hot and I was hurting and I just didn't sleep well. I apologize for a few extra things in the background today because our utility room is in my office. So I had to clear a path to get there so we get our AC replaced tomorrow. So yeah, there are a few things in the background that hopefully aren't too distracting. I'm going to have to move that box though because it's distracting me. All right. But yeah, apologize for the mess. The office is still a little bit of work in progress too. But I found myself really stuck in analysis paralysis with the channel, and it'd been a little while since I put something up, and so I was getting stuck in that again. So I decided I'm just going to schedule a stream and hold myself accountable to it. But then I had a really rough morning with a situation with one of my kids, and whenever that happens, I get angry, and then I cry a lot, and then I need a nap. But I wanted to hold myself to my own commitments, so I'm here, and I'm hoping that it helps me to be able to move past the situation into some productive solutions rather than just shutting down, as I am prone to do, and I'm really trying to break that habit instead of shutting down and shutting out the world, of coming up with productive solutions and ways that I can move forward. I'm going to zoom this out a little bit, feels a little close. I was trying to cut out some of the clutter in the background, but I feel like my head's too big. So today I wanted to just go over some fun articles that I have found recently on a few different ADHD topics. If you have a particular topic you're interested in going over or learning more about today, put it in the comments because I have a few different areas and I'm just going to take it how things come. But before I do that, if I can get my thing working here, I'm going to run our intro. Hope this is the right one. Hi, I'm Nicole, and as you have probably guessed, I have ADHD. I live and breathe all things ADHD in my personal, family, and professional life. I have a background in psychology and special education, and I've gained a lot of knowledge over the years about ADHD, what it really is, how it touches every aspect of your life and the life of your child, as well as a wealth of information and strategies for living with ADHD and parenting kids with ADHD. In this community, we share stories, we learn together, and we support each other as we navigate all things ADHD. Welcome. Sorry, forgot to turn my mic back on. Thank you. Oh my gosh, guys, the learning curve. Thank you for your patience. What I was saying is I want to start with a topic that comes up really frequently. Can you hear me now? Am I back? Yes, no? Give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear me. All right, I think I'm back. I want to talk about the differences in ADHD in girls and boys, men and women. In the clinical field, we are seeing a huge uptake in diagnosis in women in their mid to late 30s and above. 20s as well, but a huge number since the start of the pandemic of women older who have been misdiagnosed, mislabeled, and are now being diagnosed with ADHD. So, of course, anytime there's a huge shift like that, all the researchers and all the clinicians want to know what's going on. So, there's a lot of research happening right now, finally, on the differences between men and women with ADHD. It has only been very, very recently that things like hormones and menstrual cycles and their effects on ADHD symptoms have been researched at all, which is just mind-boggling to me, because if you are a woman with ADHD, you know that your symptoms are absolutely affected in different phases of your cycle. So that's something we'll talk about later. I'm not going to talk so much about that today, but this first article I want to go over, this is new for me, is presenting a screen. So hopefully this works. I want to share. Make sure that there's nothing on that screen that is going to be. I do a lot of work for our clinic on this computer too, so I have to double check every time and make sure that I don't have anything confidential up on my computer before it goes up. But add this article here. I'm going to put it, no, that's not big enough. Let's see. Oop. I want to change this layout so that, there, that'll work. Can see that okay. So this website is a great resource if you want to just start diving into different topics about ADHD. It's called attitudemag.com. They have a printed magazine as well, but a lot of articles, resources for consumers and professionals. But this is a really good kind of summary. So we're just going to go through this article a little bit and kind of pause. If you have questions, pop them up in the chat, or anything you want to add to it. There's only a few of us on here right now. I'm hoping that a few more pop on, or if you're on replay crew, happy to have you as well. Please remember to like the video, share it with anyone who you think could benefit. Obviously, the first goal from the channel is to get to 1,000 subscribers. That's kind of the first requirement for monetization. This channel is not meant to be like a huge income earner. We have other streams of income. However, the more that we can kind of do with the channel, that way, the more resources I can provide to you in the way of, for a lot of things. So primary goal is to continue to provide really good resources, and some funds help with that. But also, funds from this channel are going to be going towards the treatment of my own family and our ADHD. First step, finishing up our service dog training. So I'm just going to be really transparent about those goals. But yeah, share, that helps this channel get in front of more eyes and get to that first subscriber goal. So why ADHD in women is routinely dismissed, misdiagnosed, and treated inadequately. So, we'll just read from this and then I'll kind of interject my thoughts as we go. ADHD is not a male disorder, but men and boys are diagnosed far more commonly than women and girls. Why? Lingering stereotypes, referral bias, internalized symptoms, gender role expectations, comorbidities, and hormonal fluctuations all complicate the ADHD presentation in women. Those can all be big roadblocks for us to get diagnosed and to know that that's what we should be doing. So, brief definition, ADHD is a neurological disorder. So I'm going to expand that and say it is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So there's problems in the areas of the brain as they are being developed. So in that process, there's a delay in development. But then once we're, past that age of 25 is kind of when they say brains are fully developed, a little earlier for women, but around 25 for men. Those developmental differences are permanent. It's characteristic by a persistent pattern of inattention. I have a little bit of issues with that as well. We'll talk about that later. With or without hyperactivity and impulsivity that interferes with daily functioning. That interference with daily functioning is key to diagnosis, right? So I'm sure if you have been diagnosed or if you have a kid with ADHD, you've heard, oh, well, everybody's a little ADD, right? Oh, I just had an ADD moment, right? All of those things that are incredibly annoying to those of us who are living with, the disorder of ADHD that is interfering with our daily function in all areas of our life. But that is a critical point in diagnosis. You can have these symptoms and not be given the diagnosis of ADHD because you are functioning. And that comes in with diagnosis as well. We'll talk a little bit about that more later. So while the prevalence rates are increasingly similar by gender, so prevalence rates are similar, the diagnosis rate among men is nearly 69% higher than it is among American women. So 5.4% of men in the US have a diagnosis versus 3.2% of women. So they used to think a lot like that it was a male-based disability, right? That it only happened to boys, or that happened to boys much more frequently. But what we know now is it is not a gender-specific disability. It affects girls and boys just as equally, but the girls aren't getting diagnosed. So why? ADHD in women does not comply with stereotypes. Its distinct symptom presentation is skewed towards inattention. So that there's 3 types of ADHD, right? Inattentive subtype, hyperactive subtype, and combined type. Women and girls are much more likely to fall into that inattentive or combined subtype, whereas little boys are much more likely to be classically hyperactive. Now, they're the ones who are bouncing off the walls or causing problems for everybody. Therefore, they're getting identified, right? And hyperactivity in girls looks different. So, for example, for me, I'm a combined type, predominantly inattentive. However, I do have hyperactivity, but my hyperactivity as a little girl in school looked like a motor mouth and never stopped talking. It's a reason why I could sit and talk on one subject for hours and hours and hours, sometimes a little too quickly. My hyperactivity is in my thoughts. My brain doesn't ever stop. And that comes out in my mouth, especially when I was younger and didn't have the ability to shut it down. I still don't always have that ability, and people around me will attest to that fact. So it is still a problem, right? Women and girls today are still being misidentified, misdiagnosed, and underdiagnosed. But the other part of that is this daily functioning. I'm going to put this functioning, not poorly. So I'm assuming you mean not poorly as in poorly the the British use of that word, like sick. Right, we're not broken. It's just that daily functions are interrupted and disrupted by these symptoms, and the ability to function in society as it is now, right? I always joke that functioning but poorly. Okay, got it. Thank you for that correction. There's levels, right? There's levels of impairment. And if your daily functioning over time is consistently being affected, then that is the criteria for diagnosis. If you're coping really well, you may not at that point in your life qualify for diagnosis. And so that's where it kind of gets a little interesting, because someone might say, well, I was assessed a while ago and I didn't have ADHD. Well, as many of us women who've been diagnosed later on in life, if I had gone in to get diagnosed when I was in high school, college, I would not have met the criteria for a diagnosis, because my primary daily functioning at the time was school, and I had coping strategies. I did well in school. I was extremely bright, high IQ, which helped. I functioned great if there was a deadline. I could procrastinate like crazy, but as soon as that adrenaline kicked in for that deadline, man, could I crank out the work. And I was smart enough to keep right. I was really fortunate that way. It's actually another really common thing in both men and women is the idea of twice exceptionality, right? While there's a high comorbidity of other neurodevelopmental delays, yeah, we're going to talk about twice exceptionality quite a bit because it's something that gets not enough attention, and particularly is not well understood in schools. Is a huge issue. But the twice exceptionality, what that means is you are both gifted in the clinical definition of gifted, which is an IQ range and a percentile. Typically, they say the gifted range is about IQ of 125 or above, but it can vary a little bit depending on subscores and whatnot. But gifted intellectually plus have a disabling condition. That's why you end up with a lot of gifted kids who are not necessarily living up to their potential. But if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, and learning disabilities are all neurodevelopmental disorders. They are all highly related to why there's so much overlap between them, why so many people can have more than one, right? You can have dyslexia and ADHD and be gifted. You can be gifted and have a really common one is, oh my gosh, why is the word just leaving my brain? Is a disability in writing called dysgraphia. There it is. Found it. It's extremely common in people with ADHD for a number of reasons. Sometimes our brains are going faster than we can write, which leads to delays in handwriting and things. But dysgraphia is also just a really common comorbidity for ADHD. Chicken and egg, why is that? Doesn't really matter a lot of the times. But we all, it's very kind of common to think of like the autistic gifted kid, right? The quote unquote idiot savant that they used to say, the Rain Man, right? The autistic kid who knows everything about one subject, but has limited, daily functioning ability, can't tie their shoes, maybe has a disability in reading or math or writing or some other area. Really commonly known. What's not commonly known is that's also something that happens with ADHD, right? All these neurodevelopmental conditions can overlap each other. They're all development area and all of them are in the same areas of the brain as they're developing. So the fact that more than one of them is happening is not really surprising when you think about it. So the title of the stream is Random Tangents, and that's because that's what just happened. I don't remember where we started. But we're going to go back to the article because I know there was more points to that, but the train went this way and it looped and looped and looped and looped, and sometimes it doesn't make it back to the start. Delayed speech, yeah, but when he starts in full sentences, super common, with especially what used to be called Asperger's. That was one of the defining characteristics back in the DSM-4 before it was updated and the diagnosis labels were changed. One of the main differences in do they have autism or do they have Asperger's syndrome had to do with language, right? Do they have a language delay, pragmatic language disorder or not? Kids with Asperger's were, if they did not have a language delay, kids on the autism spectrum were more likely to be diagnosed with Asperger's. If they did have a language delay, that was the differentiation between autism and Asperger's. We've gotten rid of that Asperger's label for a number of reasons. Number one, it has a problematic history from the name of it and where it came from, and the researcher who kind of came up with that label. So we wanted to get away from the language. But also, all of the diagnostic criteria was not specific enough, and it was really very arbitrary whether it was, is it Asperger's? Is it autism? Is it? So when they were coming up with new diagnostic criteria, with new research, they found that it was just more beneficial all around to label it as an autism spectrum disorder. And you can fall anywhere on that spectrum in any of the domains, right? You've got language, you've got adaptive behavior, you've got cognitive, you've got social, emotional learning, behavioral, right? And you can be in anywhere on that spectrum in any of those domains. And autism spectrum disorder can still fit. They do now have level 1, level 2, level 3, which is a functioning label. Your level 3s are going to be your nonverbal. The majority of kids who it's not as simple as level 1 is what Asperger's used to be, because it encompasses more than that. But your kids who used to be diagnosed with Asperger's would now be most likely considered level 1 autism spectrum disorder, which is primarily what we see in our clinic. As kids are getting diagnosed older, the higher, I guess, lower levels of functioning are identified usually fairly early on because of that language piece, right? So, in fact, one of my kids was the same way with the language component. Qualified for early intervention services around 18 months until he was 3 because of this language delay. High frustration in his inability to communicate, because we were shocked that he was having delay, because starting at like about age 6 months, he was speaking like full paragraphs, babbling with intonation. There was spaces in his words, right? There was so much language there that couldn't get out. And then when he would get frustrated, all his ability to think would just completely shut down. He couldn't work through that frustration tolerance. It's still a problem that we're having. The reason why we have this puppy on the floor back here is to help with that frustration tolerance, help him identify and intervene with him in those early stages. But that's really common for these types of kids, is because their language delay is not necessarily in expressive and receptive language. It's in what's called pragmatic language. It's that social language. And we will definitely, in fact, put it right here, my list. This is one that I need to get a little bit more information from Dr. ADHD. I don't know what we're going to call him on the channel right now, but my husband is a licensed psychologist. Language. And he specializes in ADHD, autism spectrum, learning disabilities, does neuropsych evaluations, and his doctoral dissertation had to do with nonverbal learning disabilities and pragmatic language. So Equality, I would not be surprised. How long ago was that? And if you saw a psychiatrist, so did they do a neuropsychological evaluation, or did she just talk to you for a little while and maybe give you one checklist to fill out? Because that could be the difference. And we can talk about diagnosis, steps, who, what, where, how, and neuropsych evals. Because there are several different people that can give that diagnosis, right? It's a medical diagnosis. But if your case is not totally straightforward, or if they're kind of an older school doctor that's maybe not up on the current research, misdiagnosed really happens. So we'll talk about that. We'll continue on this article. I think some of what you're talking about might come up. So ADHD in women is still largely misunderstood, overlooked, and inadequately studied. Despite improved ADHD awareness, we're right here on this paragraph. No thanks. Improved ADHD awareness in general, science still stands to learn and untangle much about ADHD in women, particularly the influence of biology, neurology, and gender constructs on the condition's appearance, trajectory, and treatment course. Excuse me. Okay, am I back on? Hopefully. I need to get a different monitoring situation because I can either hear my computer or my microphone, but not both at the same time right now. So, but again, learning curves. I'm figuring it out. So, historical perspectives on ADHD. Our understanding of ADHD has evolved significantly. I would say it's evolved hugely over the last 20 years, but the trajectory was here, and now we're going here, right, in the last 10 years. Once considered and defined by measures of hyperactivity in children, ADHD is now understood to include inattentiveness and to potentially last a lifetime. I'm going to take away that potentially. It does last a lifetime. Symptoms might be more or less present at different times of your life, depending on what strategies you have set up, depending on coping skills, depending on your environment and how well it's suited for your brain. But it does last a lifetime. The differences in brains and brain development, it doesn't stop when you become an adult. Those differences are there permanently. It just may not be as problematic, right? It's more problematic trying to get through school oftentimes because school requires so much executive function issues. It's very tasking on that, but also because you're required to do a bunch of things that are boring. And that doesn't work well for people with ADHD a lot. So later on, when you can self-select your way into careers and into situations, into environments that are more conducive for the way your brain works, your symptoms might not interfere as much with that daily living. However, it might and often will still have a lot of issues with other areas of your life, managing the household, bills, things like that. It looks different, right? Hyperactivity in an 8-year-old boy is going to look different even than a 35-year-old male. So that doesn't mean you're not hyperactive, just like hyperactivity in a little girl or in a 30-year-old woman is going to look different than an 8-year-old boy. So it's going to shift. It's not going to be as physical. It's not going to be as active. You might be able to better control your impulses, but I bet that one guy who's such a daredevil and is so fun and he's the life of the party. I can picture this guy, right? He's hyperactive and impulsive. He just has found a way of making it work for him. So it's less of a issue in his life, right? Or these people, they have jobs and they have a really good executive assistant who manages their schedule, make sure they get places on time. They're entrepreneurs who have really good business partners who handle the details that their brains don't handle. You've got a spouse who takes over, the certain tasks at home, right? This is true for a lot of men traditionally with traditional gender roles, right? You've got your wife at home, mom of the kids, who's managing the meal planning, the grocery shopping, likely a lot of the budgeting, laundry, dishes, all of those things that are incredibly hard for ADHD brains, which is what led me to my diagnosis and led me to a lot of years of feeling like a worthless human being because I couldn't keep up on those things when I stepped away from working for 10 years, 12 years, how many years? I don't know. I always was finding things to do in the meantime, so there was always a little bit of work involved, but predominantly I was a stay-at-home mom for 13 years. And I was not good at that stuff. Not good at keeping house. We've gotten to the point where we made some accommodations at home. It was kind of a sore spot in our marriage for the first 10 years of marriage because we didn't know why. Like, I just wasn't able to keep up on those things. It was frustrating for my husband to come to be in. There was, a lot of years where he's in school and working full time in schools or in private practice and working kind of 70 hours a week and then coming home and having to do laundry, and the house is a disaster and there's things to do. Like, so many things that still need to be done that were not stereotypically, like, we hadn't divided those things based on gender stereotypes, right? We had consciously chosen those roles at that time in our life because our priority was getting him through school, through internship, to licensure, and into a stable career to sustain the household while our kids were young. It was not just like a automatic assumption, like misogyny type thing. A lot of women are forced into that position. We chose that. I chose that. I deferred graduate programs, chose different programs, and chose career opportunities that would provide for that because that's what we had chosen early in our marriage. So that, again, random tangents is the name of the stream. Soapbox. Where was I? Oh, that potentially last a lifetime. They do last a lifetime. So still many outdated and ADHD stereotypes persist. We're right here in this paragraph. I can't get through a paragraph without a random tangent. Both in and outside the medical community, hampering the study, detection, and treatment of ADHD in women today. Excuse me. I ate lunch before I got on the stream. Not smart. But I had to get some blood work done this morning, so I had to eat later. Anyway, whole thing. Not going to go down that tangent. Recent research predicts serious mental and physical health outcomes for women who are inadequately evaluated and treated. This is interesting. I'm going to write this down too, not to go on this tangent right now. But I met with a functional medicine doctor last week to go over some blood work and things. And it was very interesting, the discussion on internal and external stressors. And like cortisol, cortisol levels and cortisol cycles, and how that affects long-term health. For me in particularly, I have an undifferentiated autoimmune disorder, so I'm prone to more of that inflammation problems. But high levels of stress can really affect your physical health as well, not just your mental health, right? When you're misdiagnosed, when you're just told you're anxious, when you're told there's nothing wrong with you, but you consistently are having this dysfunction, right? Your limits your impaired functioning that meets that diagnostic criteria, but you don't have a reason why. It just makes you feel horrible about yourself. Anxiety and depression are highly comorbid with ADHD. And again, chicken and egg sort of thing, but does it really matter? But, I would say 95 to 98% of people who are living with ADHD either have diagnosable clinical anxiety or depression, or at least have episodes of significant anxiety or depression that insurance would pay for treatment for, whereas they don't always pay for treatment for ADHD. And that's a whole other soapbox of treatment and insurance. But not feeling like you fit in the world is depressing, right? Okay, so equality, it was 5 to 7 years ago. Okay, I was given something like a checklist. I'm guessing it was a Vanderbilt. It's the most common one that's given outside of a psychologist's office. It's given as part of a neuropsych eval as well, but it kind of is the one checklist that they'll give. She was older, but the doctor obviously knows more than I do. Okay. But you, the doctor, we'll talk about the insurance thing. They're picky about what they'll cover treatment-wise. So here's the thing. The doctor is the expert in medicine, but you are the expert on yourself. You are the expert on your child. So if it doesn't feel right, there's a reason we get second opinions for cancer, for the dentist, for all these other medical things, right? And a psychiatrist, they are not an expert in neuropsychology and in identifying neurodevelopmental disorders. That's not their area of expertise. They are medical doctors who are experts in treating things with prescriptions, with medicines. That's where their treatment expertise is. Some do more therapy than others, depends on their training. But primarily, a psychiatrist's job is to work with the brain chemistry to know what medications will impact what things and why, what drugs can't, interact with other drugs, things like that. But even they still don't know very well why certain medications work for some people and not for others, and what exactly they do. We're cause and effect, we're guess and checking, or try this and see what it does. And if it helps, great. And if it doesn't, we'll switch it. That's a lot. Psychiatry is the most guesswork, I would wager, of any medical field right now, because there's no kind of tests you can give that will help to guide the treatment. It's just speaking to someone. So my recommendation, the difference between going to a psychiatrist or a general practitioner for this type of diagnosis, especially in women, because it has been so historically misunderstood. 5 to 7 years ago, the amount of research and information we're getting about the differences in women with ADHD and how they present and how to diagnose them is vastly different now than it was 5 years ago. There was a huge surge in the pandemic for a lot of reasons. But it's one of the factors that's led to the medication shortages that we have, is the increase in diagnosis in women. As much as I hate the medication shortage and how it's been affecting my family in particular lately, I know what it's like to be a woman who was misdiagnosed for most of my life. And getting the accurate diagnosis changed everything for me. It changed my outlook on life. It changed my outlook on myself, on my self-esteem, the way I think about different relationships, how I work with my own kids with ADHD. But number one, forgiving myself and feeling like I am not just horrible at life. right? That there's a reason why these things are so hard for me, and that they may not be overcome, that there's things that I can do, but that sometimes I'm just going to need to accommodate and know that I have limits. Obviously, you're making me cry too. I hope it's the good kind of cry. I hope it's the kind of cry where you feel seen and heard. That's why I wanted to do this channel. That's the community I want here, is for people to find that place where you belong, that place where you're like, oh, I'm not crazy. There's other people like me, where we can learn these things. So what I'm going to recommend, I don't know how things work in Canada for neuropsych evaluations. I'd like to have eventually some other people on the channel who've gone through that process in different countries and different states, who can kind of explain their process there, because I really only know our process. However, the knowledge is the same. I just don't know as far as like how it works with insurance and how you go about finding a doctor and that sort of thing. But right now, my channel is my 100 people is not very attractive to. I'd love to have Runkle come on and talk about I really would. My dream interview would be to talk to like Ian Runkle's mom, as a mom of boys with ADHD who, every time he tells a story about his childhood, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so my kids. I would love to talk to his mom because I'm sure she's an amazing lady and could share some really valuable insight. But anyway, I don't think that's ever going to happen, but throwing it out into the universe. But you need a comprehensive neuropsych evaluation, not just one Vanderbilt checklist. They need to do cognitive testing. They need to do behavioral testing, adaptive behavior, executive functioning. At some point, we'll go through, I'll write this down too. Topics for my husband. Language. Different tests for diagnosis. I know the general areas, and I know some of the tests that he likes to use for certain things, but I'm not the expert in neuropsych tests. I can tell you, if you give me like a printout of the scores, I can oftentimes tell you a lot of what it might mean, and give you but I'm not a psychologist. I have my master's in special ed, so I can do kind of minimal testing interpretation. But they need to be testing all of those areas. You need a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation done by a licensed psychologist or neuropsychologist. Depending on where you are, there's different licensures and different names. For example, in Utah, they only have one license for a psychologist. And then you are obligated to practice in your area of expertise. So while you may have your education in clinical psychology, neuropsychology, counseling psychology, school psychology, there's only one licensure exam. There's only one license for a licensed psychologist. So that's different in other states. In some states, there's a different license for neuropsychology, a different for clinical, a different for counseling. But in Utah, it's all under one license. So when you're looking up with your insurance or whatnot, like there's neurologists. That's not what you want. Neuropsychology. But don't necessarily pay attention so much to their credentials as looking through the website of any of these people that you're thinking of going to and read their areas of expertise, because you want someone who is, are you a French speaker? And you can spam my chat. There's only like 4 people here. We're just hanging out. I'm hoping that people will watch on replay because I think this is a really important discussion. And I hope that you guys will also share it so that we can get more people on here. Does it affect diagnosis? Like which psychologist does the exam? No. Anyone who's a licensed psychologist or a medical doctor can diagnose ADHD or autism spectrum. Oh, Japanese. That's awesome. I love it. I have a real affinity for kind of Asian Pacific Islanders. I went to school at BYU Hawaii, so a good, only about, I'd say 15%, 15, maybe 20% of the school was, thank you, Murmur, was people from the U.S. mainland. About, I'd say 30% of the school were people who were second language, 80% of the school was international. Probably half of those were from Asian countries. My husband had a Japanese roommate that was just one of my favorite people in the world. So thank you for being here. That's not my claim to fame. I love all these people. I just, I really do have such a deep connection with, there's a lot of Japanese people live in Hawaii too, but with Asian Pacific Islanders. Just salt of the earth. And I love all the different cultures melding together, and the experience that I had learning about all those different cultures. I also spent a semester in college in France, so add another culture to the list. But I just you will not find any, I guess, I don't know what other word, you will not find any prejudice or racism or anything on this channel, because man, do I love people. Anyway, it doesn't matter which of those types of doctors you see, they can all diagnose. What's different is the path through which they get to that diagnosis, right? A neurologist is more concerned about the functioning and firing of your brain. And neurologists, while they can diagnose ADHD and they can prescribe for ADHD, they're going to more be in, I think of neurologists as like the electricians, like they're more interested in how your brain fires. And then psychiatrists are going to be like the chemists. They're going to help you figure out your brain chemistry. The psychologist is, and then you've got your general practitioner who's looking at your whole system and they know a little bit about everything. A psychologist knows about mental health conditions and kind of the play between nature and nurture and diagnosing kind of your mind, right? A neuropsychologist is specifically in the development of your brain. So they're the ones who are going to deal with kind of traumatic brain injuries and how changing the structures of your brain affects behavior. But that kind of overlaps then with these neurodevelopmental disorders where your brain developed differently, not typically, right? Neurotypical versus neurodivergent is kind of the buzzword of the day. But really it is just a difference in the way your brain developed. So neuropsychologist, neuropsych evaluation, and find someone who is an expert in neurodevelopment as opposed to a traumatic brain injury expert. Unless you've had a traumatic brain injury, which traumatic brain injury can often present like ADHD, so that can impact things. And if you have ADHD, you're more likely to have more traumatic brain injuries, and your traumatic brain injury is more likely to increase your ADHD symptoms. So all these things that are related. Welcome, Shima. You're right on time. We're just going off on random tangents and you can catch up later. But let's get back to the article. I was planning on getting through maybe 4 articles today, but we may only get through this one because it is very dense. There are a lot of things. That's why I wanted to start with this one, is because it's so, number one, I'm very passionate about this topic because of my own story, and because I know there are so many out there like me who are still haven't found, right? I don't know how to say this. Sometimes I lose my words because of ADHD. Eventually, if I start doing a merch or something, there's going to be a sticker that says because ADHD, because it's just, anyway. So we were talking about mental and physical health outcomes for women who are inadequately evaluated and treated. I'm going to make a note of that too. Mental, physical health Outcomes. Women. Okay, here's the myths we're going to talk about. ADHD is a male disorder. It is amazing how much that is still prevalent. We're getting better, but man, did we do a bad job for a long time. Hyperactive boys deemed disruptive and unmanageable were the ones referred to clinics. Early studies were based on the behaviors of these white hyperactive boys. These findings helped shape the diagnostic criteria and assessment scales still in use today. So, as much as I hate the kind of like automatic assumption of the straight white male being, everything, when it comes to ADHD, little white boys were the only ones who were being studied. So we still have a long way to go culturally of identifying what ADHD looks like in other cultures. There is a lot of research happening. My main source of research for like the last, it's been probably 20, 30 years that Dr. Russell Barkley has been like the leading researcher in ADHD for a very, very long time. He's written all the books. And he used to put out this monthly thing for clinicians called the ADHD report, where he kind of summarized all the most recent research. And just the end of 2022, he put out his last issue. I mean, he's older and probably retiring, so I got to find out where the new source is for getting all this research, although I do have a lot of that to go. But the other myth, ADHD is a childhood disorder. We talked about this a little bit. ADHD was long classified as disruptive behavior disorder of childhood. Based on the hallmark of hyperactivity. Over time, it's become clear that ADHD does not resolve at puberty. And if you are parenting a kid, it doesn't resolve at puberty. It gets, and yeah, it's a whole thing. Try having a son with ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder who is 14 years old. And that inattentive symptoms persist longer than hyperactive symptoms. And again, I would say that not necessarily that it then shifts to being more inattentive type, but that the hyperactivity is going to look different. It's going to be more internal hyperactivity as opposed to external hyperactivity, the hyperactive mind. So, signs and symptoms of women with ADHD. ADHD in women primarily means a greater likelihood for the following: inattentive symptom presentation, including, per the DSM-5, failing to give close attention to details or making careless mistakes in activities, trouble holding attention on tasks, not following through on instructions and failing to finish duties, losing focus, getting sidetracked, random tangents, trouble organizing tasks and activities, getting easily distracted, and forgetfulness in daily activities. Anyone in the chat recognize any of those symptoms? Or if you're on replay clue, comment, hand raise, that's me, if this looks like you. And then internalizing symptoms, including mood and anxiety. So, yeah, Attitude Mag is a great research. You could deep dive for days and days and days and never get through everything that's on there. It is fantastic. It's very surface level. So, I'm going to deep dive a little bit more and kind of add my 2 cents as we go along, as I've been doing. But it's great, and really helpful to be able to share with other people because it's a quick read, but a lot of good understanding there. It's a fantastic resource. So these internalizing symptoms, I don't know if you're familiar with internalizing versus externalizing behaviors. It's a clinical definition. It's something that comes up on behavior scales like the BASC. If you're getting a neuropsych eval, make sure they're giving you a BASC or something equivalent. The Conners is okay, but the BASC is better. Internalizing versus externalizing, right? So I have both in my kids and in me. I was definitely an internalizer. So I take all my stress, I shove it down, I hide it from the world. Nobody knows what's going on. I look just fine from the outside, but internally, I'm a disaster. Externalizing behaviors are like this kind of automatic like explosion, right? So for example, I have 2 sons who both have the same list of diagnoses. Well, one has an additional, but they both have ADHD. They both have OCD as their primary issues, right? One, you immediately know when something is bothering him because you talk to him and he will explode. Rage, anger, it's all about you. He's arguing with you. It's your fault. Everything is out here. My other son, he holds everything in until the thing that breaks the camel's back and he just melts into a puddle on the floor and is in a complete emotional breakdown. With him, I can tell when something's bothering him because I know him. He's normally like a really empathetic, kind, always thinking of other people, really charismatic. He's just such a wonderful kid. I just adore him. Everyone adores him because he's social. He's the most social of any of my kids. He just loves people. He wants to make everyone happy. When something has happened at school or when his OCD is flared up, he just gets grouchy and just kind of irritable. And that's how I know that something big is going on. He doesn't yell and scream. He doesn't tell me what it is. He doesn't fight against it. But I know it's affecting him because he's a kid and he is not very good at hiding that emotion. But it usually takes a lot of digging to get down to the root. So internalizing behaviors versus externalizing behaviors. Women are much more likely to be internalizers for whatever reason, whether that's just something that comes with our chemistry and our way of dealing with things, or whether that is societal norms telling us we have to hold things in and be quiet. Again, a lot of these kind of why is it questions are not something that I care that much about. I'm more of a behavioral approach. It's like, okay, why is it that way? I could spend hours and hours figuring out why, but is it going to change then what I do with it? Like, is it going to change the treatment? Is it going to change or can I just say, yeah, this is a thing and move forward, change behavior? So a lot of times kind of I'll bring up those things and I'll be like, I don't really care why. Here's what we're going to do about it. Amanda, this is a really good question that I am going to flag here. And this may be another video entirely. If we have time, I have a hard cutoff at 3:30 my time because I have to get my kid to an activity that starts at 4. But ODD versus PDA. So they can sometimes present similarly, but they are very different. And I want to make sure that I give the best information. So I may have to look up some articles on that, and maybe I will make a video about that later in the week. But I'm going to put that here: oppositional defiant disorder versus pathological demand avoidance. There can be a lot of PDA in oppositional defiant disorder, but oppositional defiant disorder spans more than just demand avoidance. And pathological demand avoidance is, ODD can be a standalone diagnosis, although it very rarely comes by itself. It usually is comorbid with anxiety, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, or something like that. It is rarely seen by itself. It can be by itself. Pathological demand avoidance is more of a symptom than a diagnosis. That's kind of just the more general, at least right now. I don't believe that pathological demand avoidance is a DSM. I'm going to look that up real quick so make sure I'm giving you the right information. But I don't believe that pathological demand avoidance is a diagnosis like in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual by itself. Again, I'm not a psychologist. I just run a clinic and I'm married to a psychologist and have a lot of background education and life experience in psychology. So I don't ever want to claim perfect knowledge or any of that. And as always, none of the information I am giving here should be taken as diagnosis in and of itself. If you feel like something resonates with you, go see a specialist in your area. DSM-5 pathological Yeah, it's not recognized by the DSM-5 or the ICD-10. ICD-10 has more to do with billing, diagnostic billing codes. So it is not a disorder by itself. It is a symptom. And it is more to do with avoiding everyday demands as opposed to avoiding oppositional defiant disorder, which has more to do with like, I want to describe this correctly. Let's see if I can come up with a little bit. I don't know that that's this. One definition says often the difference between the two presentations is won't, can't. ODD is a willful choice to disobey. PDA is a crippling inability to comply. I don't know that I agree with that. ODD often has to do with more of a need to control a situation as opposed to the anxiety of the task presented. Although ODD can be anxiety driven. Yeah, I'm gonna have to do a little bit more of a deep dive and a little bit more research into that and get some input from Dr. ADHD, I think, in order to give you a really good breakdown of that. But thank you for the question. I'm going to write that down because that's a really pathological demand avoidance is definitely getting a lot more attention. I want to say it's kind of, again, a buzzword hot topic kind of thing. Similar, it's like similar to the language around, neurodivergence or and not that any of those things are like bad or inaccurate or but there tends to be kind of waves in the way we talk about things, kind of pop psychology buzzwords. It happens a lot with the way things are happening on social media talking about these topics, which again, I have kind of like, I love that it's being talked about, and there's some really great accounts out there that are expanding knowledge, and that's always good. But yeah, I want to be really careful on this channel, or particular because of my other roles in my other job, to keep it very rooted in research, rooted in kind of what's out there in clinical practice, and steer clear of a lot of too much of the pop psychology terminology and ideas out there, simply because I want it all to be based in something that's solid and has, peer-reviewed backgrounds. And I don't want to give any information that doesn't have research backing behind it. Obviously, I'm not going to be perfect in that because I'm influenced just as much as anyone else, and I'm in this realm. But the majority of what I'm going to talk about is going to have a lot of research, medical and psychological research, peer-reviewed things behind it. And pathological demand avoidance is definitely in the research right now. But I think the reason why people are getting so confused about the difference between PA and ODD is kind of has to do with this like flood of pop psych and people talking about it who maybe have life experience but not educational background. I happen to have both, and so that's why I feel like makes me uniquely qualified to speak on these topics, is that I'm living it every day, but I also have educational background and am working in clinical realms in the field. So I hope that makes sense. I'll talk a little bit more about that, bring that topic up quite a bit, I think, to make sure that I'm using language that is universal And that's really, that everything we talk about here is really firmly backed in research. And that when it's not, that I definitely identify, hey, this is something I think, or this is something that's being talked about, but this is what the research shows about it, or there's not enough research into it, or, things like that. So hopefully that kind of helps answer your question, but also gives you a little bit of idea of where I'm coming from on this. So speaking of getting back to gender role expectations and how that affects the diagnosis of ADHD in women, ADHD women is complicated by gender role expectations. Now, this is obviously going to be cultural, and why we still need so much research into ADHD outside of, Western society. Society's long list of expectations for women managing the self, the family, and the home requires consistent coordination of executive functions. Women with ADHD are not well wired for these demands. Bing, bing. I need a graphic that has like flashing lights, like, and arrows. Yep, this is me. But in seeking social acceptance, they are often determined to meet them, typically by masking symptoms and problems. Shame and self-blame fuel the dynamic interplay between societal expectations and ADHD's executive dysfunction. Again, ding, ding, ding. I made a swoop, but I need to make some sort of graphic that I can just like arrows at me, because this is my story right here, which I will go more into my story in the future. I wanted to develop this into a podcast eventually, and the idea behind the podcast is not going to be just these kinds of conversations, but specifically interviews and stories of the path to diagnosis and ADHD in your life. So my story would be kind of the format for how the podcast would go. So I'm trying to determine if I do a brief episode right now with my story, and then when I'm ready to do podcast type, I will re-record it as a podcast episode. I think that's probably what I'll do, because I don't know when I'm going to be ready to launch the podcast. One thing at a time. Anyway, to understand women with ADHD, clinicians cannot underestimate the extent to which women measure their self-worth and self-esteem according to their success in conforming to gender expectations. I think, obviously we're getting better at dividing gender roles and identifying, where they are and are not effective, where they are not toxic. But also there are still a lot of women, a lot of families who choose this division of labor, right? And it still is very prevalent in our society, but in many, many cultures, right? Outside of the US, Canada, Europe. This is the predominant issue of gender roles in cultures around the world. So that's going to affect diagnosis. And also, we mask that and ends up internalizing, becoming anxiety disorders, social deficits. Women with ADHD compared to men with ADHD struggle more with socialization. I would maybe disagree with this a little bit. Boys with ADHD struggle socially quite a bit. It's just that girls and women have much more sophisticated social rules to comply to. So it can be more devastating for women. It can be harder to navigate for women because it's more complicated. You've got, we all know the kind of that toxic girl group that you're dealing with in elementary school, middle school, high school. It's more complicated, therefore the social deficits, I think, become maybe more apparent, or women are more affected. Girls are, again, chicken egg. Is this a genetic female male thing, or is this a societal thing? But research shows that it is more of, it is a gender thing for women, that they're more social creatures, that they need more female social interaction than males, than boys. Boys tend, their socialization tends to be more physical in nature, right? So the little boys who aren't good at sports are going to have a harder time. But if you got a little ADHD boy who's really active and he's great at soccer, like he's going to have a level of social standing based on that physicality. Whereas girls, their social systems aren't necessarily based that same way. And so when a girl is that way, super active, athletic, right now they're a tomboy, they don't necessarily fit in to that social group. So, I mean, like I said, these Attitude Mag articles are great, but they are very surface level. But it does give us some good talking points. That's why I wanted to go over it this way rather than just share a link. So I can add my 2 cents. Women are often overwhelmed with demands of relationships and tend to have fewer meaningful relationships as a result. They rarely initiate friendships and have trouble maintaining them. Isolation protects from discomfort and confusion. They often struggle with rejection sensitivity, an intense emotional response to real or perceived rejection, which can make social interaction a potential source of pain. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria is something that comes up a lot with women with ADHD, but even if it doesn't go to kind of a diagnosable level of rejection sensitivity dysphoria, oftentimes it's developed from kind of a history of rejection. And so you become kind of hyper aware of the possibility of that rejection, and the rejection gets more and more painful. Because it becomes this pattern, right? I definitely have this in my history as well. I'm going to have to pause for just a minute because I am hearing some difficulty coming from upstairs with my kids. So I just need to go check on a situation real quick. So I'm going to just switch this like this. I'm going to put a little music on for a second. I have my own music, so we don't have to listen to. Okay, I'm back. Apologize for that. Crisis averted. It wasn't what I thought. It was joyful, screeching. We're being a noisy cricket, not screaming at our brother. So we're all good. You hear the sounds and you just never know. This is what living in a house. It's summer, man. I gotta find a nanny for a couple days a week. Anyway, rejection sensitivity was what we were talking about. Again, when I go through my story, I'll talk about this, but I'm sure a lot of you can relate to a lot of feeling socially isolated, feeling like you don't fit in, but trying to fake it and not really understanding why you don't fit in. That was certainly a pattern for me that once I got my diagnosis, and I'm looking back through my life through that lens, a lot of things became clear as far as a lot of social troubles I had. I did have some times where legitimately was completely abandoned by what were my closest friends. The way I tell the stories can be kind of humorous because you have to look back on it with humor. But I remember a person who I'd been absolutely best friends, inseparable with for 3 years, calling me on the phone one day and breaking up with me, essentially. Telling me that I was holding her back socially, that she no longer wanted to be my best friend, that we could still be friends, but we weren't going to hang out for a while because I was holding her back from where she wanted to get. Now, there was a lot of layers to that situation and her own issues, things that I could foresee that were happening socially, she was feeling an opportunity to climb a social ladder that I knew was going to fall out from under her, which of course it eventually did. But, it was traumatic for me. And it was not the first time that something like that had happened to me with friends. So that rejection sensitivity came very naturally. I put up a lot of walls, took a lot of therapy for me to be able to let people in, especially girls, especially women. At that point, after that last incident, I didn't get very close to girls in the future. I preferred to hang out with boys because they told you how it was straight up. And I didn't, I had a lot of guy friends in high school. I just found it more comfortable there. I didn't have to mask quite as much because I could joke around on their level and be accepted. I never really was in as close with anyone until college. And even then, I had other circumstances like that continue throughout my life with women. So that rejection sensitivity, in my case, came from patterns of abandonment and struggles with friendships throughout my life that, I internalized to, well, there's clearly the common factor here is me. So there must be something wrong with me. It wasn't until I received my ADHD diagnosis. It's hard to say when I officially received that diagnosis because it was kind of a process over time. It got put on my medical record about 3 years ago, but when my husband's a psychologist who specializes in ADHD, so we'd been talking about it for a while and kind of through conversation determined that, yeah, that is what's going on with me. So I guess I kind of diagnosed myself eventually. But looking back on those social interactions and the way things went down and why, and realizing that it was because I didn't really understand what was happening and I wasn't noticing, whether I didn't see it because I couldn't pay attention or I wasn't paying attention to those signs or I was ignoring them and misinterpreting and pretending that they weren't there. It was clearly a pattern, but that now I could give it a reason that wasn't, I did something wrong, right? It was because of my struggles. It was because of something that I couldn't change. And as much as that seems like it would make things harder, it actually really helped. It felt better to be able to see it clearly. But I think that rejection sensitivity is heightened in women because of that complexity and social structure, right? And our innate need to have those closer emotional relationships. Not that men don't need friends and that boys don't need close friendships, but it is different for girls and women. I don't think anybody's going to deny that. Obviously speaking in generalizations, because there's always the exception to everything. This is a really interesting facet to women in ADHD. They're more likely to engage in risky sexual behaviors compared to women without ADHD. One theory for this is early recognition of sexuality as a shortcut to social acceptance. It's common to find a history of early initiation of sexual activity, early intercourse, more sexual partners, more casual sex, less protected sex, more sexually transmitted infections, more unplanned pregnancies in women with ADHD. While common, these experiences are aspects of ADHD that elicit shame. And you see in here, there's a lot of this isolation, shame, internalization. It comes from being undiagnosed with ADHD. these risky sexual behaviors, I think, are multiple fold. Yes, it's the social thing, but also impulsive behaviors, right? People with ADHD are impulsive and tend to follow the dopamine. And there's a lot of dopamine that comes from those types of behaviors and the feedback you get. And feeling like this need, it's a multifaceted issue, but certainly impulse control does not help when it comes to unplanned pregnancies, less protected sex, things like that. ADHD in women, hypersensitivities. Women with ADHD tend to experience more central nervous system hypersensitivities compared to men with ADHD. They often report more of the following: tactile defensiveness and sensory overload to being touched, and to common items like clothing, material, tags, loud music, light, smells, etc. That is not exclusive to women. It certainly happens with boys with ADHD, sensory issues. Everyone knows are really common with autism these days. Autism Speaks and some of those other campaigns for getting information out about autism have been really beneficial to people with autism. Obviously, always more to learn and always more to share. But when you see a kid who has sensory difficulties, or when in the public, the idea that, oh, they've got sensory issues, they must have autism. Well, sensory issues are just as common for people with ADHD. I think I would have to look at the article, the research that backs it up. They always post the articles down at the bottom, so I'll post some of those up to go through on a later date. But I would say women are probably more likely to be sensory avoidant, whereas boys or girls are more likely to be sensory avoidant, whereas boys are more likely to be seekers. Now, you can be both, right? You can be a seekers in some things and avoidant in others, which we've got a household full. I am certainly more sensory avoidant, particularly when it comes to auditory stimulation. But when we were dating, my husband and I, his favorite way to kind of torture and tease me was, this was in the time when the taller socks were more popular. It was pre-ankle sock, pre-no-show sock. It was like soccer socks almost, right? And so I'd have these socks that go up like mid-calf. And he would take one finger and pull one sock down. Just one. And it would drive me insane. I had to pull it. And then he would kind of like pin my arms, and he thought it was really funny. He's totally teasing me. And I used to joke and say, don't trust me with any state secrets, because all it would take would be for someone to put me in a pair of tights and like roll down one side so they weren't even, or have them be bunched up around my knees, or put me in some knee socks and have them not pulled all the way tight and one loose and bunched up, or a sock bunched up in my shoe. I would spill everything I know. Cannot handle it. I don't like being, I'm going to put this up. I don't like being touched, and I have issues with bright lights and some sounds. I hate pen clickers and whistling. I have a coworker who likes to staple stuff so hard it makes me flinch. I totally get it, and I'm going to show you. Do I have them down here? Dang it, I don't have it down here. Number one, my AirPods. The new AirPod Pro 2s. I just got them. I needed them for work because I needed the extended battery life, and the little things tipping over. The little feature of being able to like play a sound and find your thing, super helpful because I keep them attached to my keys. But I needed them for work, for being able to be on the phones for a longer period of time. The noise cancellation on the AirPod Pro 2s, really good. A little too good sometimes, but it's really helpful. Being in a car with 3 boys with ADHD who are sensory seekers raises my anxiety levels significantly, and then I don't have the patience to deal with them, and I snap and explode all over people, and it's not good. So noise canceling earbuds are good. The other thing is I have a pair of loop headphones. Let's see if I can find them. And they have a few different versions. You can also there's other ones you can get like on Amazon and stuff. I don't know how well they work because I don't have them. I do have these loop ones. Yeah, loop earplugs. And they have noise canceling, but also just decibel reducing at a few different levels. And it really helps. So if you can, and they like just fit nicely inside your ear, you can barely see them. And when you can see them, they like are cute. They come in a few different colors. I have some rose gold ones and they're cute. And they have them in like 5 different levels of decibel reducing. And if I ever do get to like monetization and sponsorship, this would probably be the first one I do, because as a sensory avoider in a house full of seekers and just with the noise of life in general, it helps a lot. So I can recommend those. You can also just hop on Amazon and look up decibel reducing earplugs. So you can still kind of hear what's going on around you. They're not completely shut out the sound. Those are good too. I like those. And if that's really what you need to focus, when I really need to focus in on something, I have to have only the sound that I am choosing to help my brain work, and anything else that interrupts me will pull me out. And can be really hard for me to get back in. Task initiation is probably my weakest executive function. So once I get started and into a project, I need to be able to stay there and not get disrupted. So noise canceling is good for that. But decibel reducing helps with kind of that ambient noise that is really irritating, just kind of takes the edge off of it. So I can definitely recommend that. Yeah, I would say get some of these kind of like loop type. I have earbuds that are pretty good, but I have to answer the phone, so I do need to hear. So some of the ones that just can dampen that noise, or if you can put your phone, if there's a light, so you can see when it's ringing, and then you can just pop that earbud out real quick. It really helps a lot, because I get it. Some of those, there's like certain noises that I'm just like, I can't. Or there's a particular pitch. One of my sons used to just, again, ADHD, random noises, sensory stuff. For him, it was like a stim. And he used to just make this like noise. I won't try and repeat it because it would be rude. But it was like at the exact pitch that would like legit, like, oh, I can hear it right now. Like it legitimately sends like a shiver down my spine if it hits that note. Like it, something about it resonates, like echoes in my head, like the sound frequency. I don't know what it is, but he would do it. Oh, I was like, buddy, I love you, but that particular sound is like you're stabbing me in the eardrum. Real bad. Hypersensitivities. Other things they have here: somatic complaints, including headaches, migraines, stomach aches, and nausea. Central nervous system issues, and sleep difficulties. Sleep difficulties is a big one we'll talk about in another video, because that's not, again, none of these are like exclusive to women. It's just the research is showing that women are more affected at a higher percentage than men, or either more women than men are affected, like that percentage, or they are just more effective than their male counterparts. But sleep is a whole topic with ADHD, delayed sleep phase syndrome, all of that. But we don't have time to go too deep into that today. That's a whole other video. ADHD in women, comorbidities. By adulthood, most women with ADHD have at least one comorbid disorder that can complicate the ADHD symptom picture. And I would say most people with ADHD have a comorbid disorder, but these are the ones that are more common in women. Anxiety. 25 to 40% of people with ADHD have an anxiety disorder. I want to see what the research on this, because our clinical experience, I would say, would higher. Of course, we are, we're seeing kind of a skewed sample, because the people coming into our clinic, we only deal with neurodevelopmental disabilities, and typically they tend to be more complicated cases, and that's why they're coming to us instead of just going to other doctors. So of course our sample size could be skewed. Mood disorders, dysregulated eating, bulimia is most common, but I would say binge eating is also Externalizing disorders like oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder, mostly found in women with impulsive type ADHD. I don't know what they're saying impulsive type ADHD is, because that's not a type. There's hyperactive type, inattentive type, or combined type, and impulsivity is a diagnostic criteria for all of those. So I don't know what they're saying with that, but conduct disorder and ODD, personality disorders like borderline personality disorder. Now I'm going to go back to rejection sensitivity, right? Borderline personality disorder is kind of the most extreme level of rejection sensitivity. So chicken and egg again. Borderline personality disorder doesn't usually develop without both genetic component and environmental factors like trauma. But yeah, comorbidities. Common comorbidities. Impulsivity. Symptoms of impulsivity further influence how ADHD presents in women. Impulsivity associated with gender atypical behaviors, including behaviors perceived as controlling, demanding, easily irritated, etc. High-risk behaviors like speeding and extreme sports. Addictive behaviors, including substance use and gambling. A significantly increased likelihood of acting on negative feelings, including self-harm, picking skin, cutting, etc. Clinicians use DSM-5 guidelines to diagnose ADHD as well as rating scales, interviews, and other practices. Research indicates that girls and women, compared to boys and men, are consistently underidentified and underdiagnosed for ADHD using these diagnostic criteria. Going back to what we talked about, where these diagnostic criteria and research was primarily conducted on white boys. So our diagnostic criteria isn't catching other cultures and isn't catching girls. 1, ADHD in women, inattentive symptom presentation. A subtle symptom presentation with a greater likelihood of inattentiveness marks the ADHD experience for many women and girls who are not outwardly disruptive to others. This is a huge one, because when you think about the kids whose parents are taking them to get a diagnosis in elementary school, right? Grades aren't usually a thing in elementary school. It's, all kind of performance-based. Grades don't usually start to get affected so much by ADHD until secondary education. Those elementary school age kids whose parents are taking them for diagnosis, why are they doing it? Because their kid is constantly getting in trouble at home and at school. Their behaviors are out of control. They're aggressive, they're impulsive, they're climbing the walls, they're breaking their arms, they're destroying the house, but they are pinging around the classroom at school and they are getting in trouble all the time. They're getting sent to the principal's office. They are disrupting the classroom. Inattentive kids in the classroom aren't getting identified because they're not causing a problem for anyone else. The kid who's sitting staring out the window is quiet. The kid who's staring at the board but nothing's getting in because their brain is somewhere else, they look like they are compliant, like they're doing what they're supposed to, right? Those kids are not getting flagged by teachers because they're not causing a problem for anyone else. They're not causing a problem for a teacher. They're not causing a problem for anyone else. And since women are much more likely to be inattentive subtype, or for their hyperactivity to be internal, they are not, or just to be chatty, right? You're going to get a lot of report cards that say, oh, they're doing great, too social, needs to stop talking. But they're not getting sent to the principal's office for checking something, running around the classroom, hitting someone, yelling, screaming out, disrupting everyone else's learning. So they're not getting identified because of their symptom presentations. They're not outwardly disruptive to others. Inattentive type boys are not getting identified either. Many clinicians, however, are most familiar with the hyperactive, disruptive presentations of ADHD that are more common in men and boys. And this is particularly with general practitioners, right? You go to your pediatrician, they don't know the subtleties. They don't know the rest of diagnostic criteria. They don't know about executive dysfunction. They just know about hyperactive little boys because their training in ADHD is this much, right? So your kid's not getting in trouble at school. They're doing fine. They don't have ADHD. Grades have nothing to do with ADHD. I had great grades, except in the classes that I thought were boring. And then I still had B's at the worst, a B plus, A minus. Because I was really smart. I knew where the line was of what I had to do to pass. And I didn't take challenging classes in subjects I didn't like. Yes, great student, but talks too much. Every report card. I entered kindergarten reading on about a third grade level, taught myself to read when I was 2-3 years old. Never stopped talking in kindergarten. Was on a behavior contract to earn stars for not talking. And my reward was to go in the corner and work on my second grade reading books, reading workbooks. And that's all I wanted to do. I had to get done the little stupid boring worksheet and not disrupt my neighbors. And then I could go over and do the stuff that was on my level that I thought was interesting. And that's where I wanted to be, was in the corner doing stuff that was still schoolwork, right? That most kids would be like, you want to go do extra math? Yeah, I wanted to go do extra math that was interesting. I got in a fight with my second grade teacher because my dad had started teaching me about negative numbers, and they were talking about subtraction and borrowing. And the other kids were, learning that you can't subtract 15 from 12. And I said, yes, you can. And my teacher, we got a big fight because it was a whole thing. Later on, I had teachers who were amazing. I had some teachers who were amazing and some who were horrible. And thank goodness for the teachers who were amazing. And one of the most amazing teachers I had who changed my life passed away this week. I have her funeral this week and I'm heartbroken about it. Ugh. She saw me and saw my potential when many, many others didn't, when I didn't see my own. Whew, didn't expect that to come up. Okay. Whew, moving on because I have to stop in like 7 minutes and take my kids to climbing. Camouflaging symptoms. Research shows that women are highly motivated to hide their ADHD symptoms and compensate for them. The symptoms that are observable are often anxiety or mood related, which can lead to the misdiagnosis. Gender bias is rarely intentional, but is insidious and pervasive. Good words. It influences how clinicians see and label women. Referrals, inattentive, non-disruptive symptoms rarely arouse concern, which is why few girls and teens with these symptoms are referred for diagnosis and consultation. We just talked about that, right? The little girl who's maybe just inattentive, not paying attention, isn't going to get referred because she's not causing a problem. However, she's missing instruction, right? So she is being adversely affected. Her education is being impacted. She's being impacted socially, but she's not causing a problem for anyone else. She isn't going to get referred for diagnosis. I think this was a big reason why there was such a huge spike in ADHD diagnosis, particularly in inattentive types during the COVID lockdowns when all the kids were home from school, right? All of a sudden, parents who are trying to teach their kids are realizing that their kid cannot focus, it's like there is something is not right. This kid is not like able to do this. And the teachers hadn't noticed or hadn't identified it because it wasn't a problem for them. When you're in a classroom of 36 kids, Utah has a problem, but even a classroom of 20 kids, if you're not causing a problem for anyone else and you're just muddling through, right? They're doing enough to not set off any flags, but they're not reaching their potential. Rating scales for ADHD are still skewed toward male behavior symptoms. Internalized symptoms and impairments are often unaddressed, and many instruments are not normed for women's values. And this is why we were talking earlier, Equality is not here anymore, but hopefully she catches up on replay. We were talking about how to get the proper diagnosis, if you just go and get one checklist, a Vanderbilt at the GP or at a psychiatrist, it may not catch it. A full neuropsychological evaluation that's going to cover multiple domains is the only way that you're going to find, these subtle differences to get a proper diagnosis. Hormonal impact. We talked a little bit about this and how little research there is on it. Fortunately, we're doing more. Ovarian hormones interact with almost every system in the body and are essential components in physical, social, and emotional health for all women. The brain is a target organ for estrogen as it protects the brain by enhancing neurotransmitter activity, which then impacts executive function, attention, motivation, verbal memory, sleep, and concentration. Estrogen levels, which fluctuate throughout the month as well as across the lifespan, impact the expression of ADHD symptoms in women. ADHD is largely thought of as a condition with stable symptoms across time, but that is not the case for women and their bodies. The truth is, ADHD symptoms vary with hormone fluctuations. ADHD symptoms increase as estrogen decreases. Estrogen decreases after ovulation in the middle of the cycle, and even further near the start of menstruation. This combination of low estrogen and high progesterone exacerbates symptoms tremendously. It also means symptoms can vary day to day. Some women may be even more sensitive to these micro fluctuations. So for 2 weeks out of the month, you might be doing fine and coping okay, and then there's a shift in your hormones and your coping strategies are no longer enough to keep up. But when you go in for diagnosis, they're looking for stable symptoms over a period of time in multiple settings. And you're going, well, and they're asking you questions. Sometimes I could do that. Yeah, this, but sometimes it's this, and it doesn't look stable, and you're not getting appropriate diagnosis. Estrogen kicks in during puberty, around the time when ADHD symptoms become more prominent in girls. However, these hormonal changes are often expressed as anxiety and emotional volatility. Emotional dysregulation is a huge symptom of ADHD. Those things are often commonly high in this time because puberty, which can lead to being misdiagnosed with an anxiety or mood disorder, treated improperly or insufficiently, or simply brushed off as, she's just going through puberty and she's a basket case, right? So, treatment considerations. ADHD can be treated with therapy, medication, lifestyle changes, and accommodations. Women with ADHD consider the following treatment options. I will interject here and say that the longitudinal outcome studies on ADHD all indicate that a combined approach gives the best results. That means therapy, lifestyle changes, and accommodations, and medication combined. Not one or the other, but both. A clinician and or therapist experienced with ADHD in women and girls because it's different. If you're not going to someone who specializes in ADHD, they aren't going to know this. A general psychologist who just sees a little bit of everything is not going to have the level of expertise generally to give appropriate therapy and treatment and know all of the options for someone with ADHD. Finding a neuropsychologist or a psychologist who specializes just in neurodevelopment, ADHD, and autism is going to be the best bet. Finding this professional is perhaps the most important and most difficult thing to do because everyone lists on their Psychology Today profile on their website, we treat. It's the reason why when we were opening our clinic that we wanted to do it differently. We didn't want to be a general mental health clinic that had psychologists who treated everything. We only want people who specialize in ADHD, autism, and learning disabilities because they're too hard to find. Family psychoeducation. It's important for your support network to understand ADHD as well. This might mean some therapy appointments with a spouse with you, reading books, sharing these types of articles, talking about it, sharing channels like this, TikToks, all of those things that and educating the general public, which is why I'm doing this, about what ADHD is, what it really is, and how it affects everything. because your family support is going to be the difference. The fact that my husband now takes over all the dishes, he and the boys do dishes. He's in charge. He assigns it. I don't ever have to worry about dishes. He's taken that over. We accommodated by sacrificing getting a new car and increasing a car payment and paying for a laundry service instead. Best thing I've ever done for my own mental health. But if my husband didn't understand, he might see that as, a waste of money or an unneeded expense. And I will 100% agree that it is absolutely a luxury and one that we have only been able to afford for about the last year. But it's truly the best thing I've ever done for my mental health outside of medication when I was having suicidal ideations. It took away so much shame and pressure from me to have the laundry handled. My husband does his own laundry. Mine and the kids goes in a bag on the porch once a week. They take it, they wash it, they bring it back, fold it, and all we have to do is put it away. And taking out those 12 steps of laundry and the constant weight of I should be doing the laundry. Can't even describe. Reframing. Therapists can help you validate your experience, question the impact of societal expectations on your outlook, and teach you to practice self-advocacy. Therapists, and that's why we're here, to validate each other's experiences. Medication. It's important to find a doctor who understands the impact of hormones on ADHD and the interplay with medication. Stimulants, for example, may be less effective in the second half of the menstrual cycle. I didn't know that. Hormone replacement therapy greatly improves ADHD symptoms in postmenopausal women as it increases available estrogen and progesterone. SSRIs are commonly prescribed for anxiety and mood disorders, so it's crucial for clinicians to understand how stimulants interact with SSRIs and impact symptoms all around. Go to a psychiatrist. Your general practitioner can prescribe all this stuff. Go to a psychiatrist, get it figured out, get stable, and then you can transfer your care to your GP if the psychiatrist is too expensive or too hard to get into, because that can be a thing. Environment restructuring. Therapists and other professionals can help you learn to restructure your surroundings to better suit your needs and thoughts to suit your life. This is huge, and we're going to talk a lot about ways that you can do that. Good strategies, things you can adjust that just make things easier. Coaching and support groups. ADHD coaches can help you meet goals, and support groups do wonders in normalizing the ADHD experience, reducing isolation, anxiety, and distress. Oh, I'm losing my camera because I think my battery is dying. Hold on, give me 1 second. But I can't keep talking because I've got the article on the screen. Okay, should be back. Maybe. Maybe. Come on. Okay, well, my camera's not coming back, and I'm coming up on my hard stop. So, just to wrap up real quick. I was going to go through a couple of articles, but apparently just got through this one. So I'm going to change the description here. And I will link this article in the description as well if you want to go read it separately. There's also some kind of other things to look at the bottom here. And you can go down the rabbit hole on this attitude.mag if you would like. If you don't want to, we'll be going through it more here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for liking the video, for sharing it with your friends, and hopefully if you're here on Replay Crew, I'd love to see your comments and questions. If you have more comments and questions later, put them in there and I will respond And my camera's making noises, but not doing anything. In the meantime, you're not alone. You are not broken, and you're doing better than you think you are. And with that, I will run the outro. And have a great day, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. This video is not a substitute for counseling, psychotherapy, medical, or mental health care. The information and advice shared here should not be used in place of any form of diagnosis, treatment, or therapy. Information provided here does not involve diagnosis or treatment of medical or mental or psychological disorders. If you feel the need for professional support, please seek a local professional in your area. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only.